Tonight on Dreadful Visions, security guards are hired to protect empty buildings, investigate unusual noises, and make sure nobody is where they shouldn't be. Most overnight shifts are painfully quiet, filled with routine patrols, flickering lights, and endless hours of silence. But every so often, a routine inspection becomes something far more unsettling. Sometimes the alarms are real. Sometimes someone really is inside. And sometimes, the person you're searching for already knows exactly where you are. These are 5 disturbing security guard stories that prove some jobs are far more dangerous than they first appear. Story 1. The building wasn't empty. 23-year-old Nathan Reed had only been working security for 3 weeks when he accepted what everyone else in his company considered the easiest assignment. A 12-story office building in downtown Cleveland had recently been purchased by developers and was scheduled for demolition at the end of the month. Every business had already moved out. Furniture had been removed, electricity had been disconnected on most floors, and the only people authorized to enter the building were construction surveyors during the day and one overnight security guard after sunset. That guard was Nathan. His instructions were simple. Complete a patrol every hour. Check that all exterior doors remained locked. Respond to any alarm notifications. Wait until the morning replacement arrived. Most nights, nothing happened. The building felt frozen in time. Reception desks still stood in the lobby, dusty office signs remained fixed beside empty suites, and forgotten calendars hung on walls displaying dates from nearly 2 years earlier. Every footstep echoed through the deserted corridors. Nathan actually enjoyed the silence. The first week passed without a single incident. Then, on his 8th overnight shift, the motion alarm activated on the 12th floor. He looked at the security monitor. Zone 12C, North Hallway. Nathan frowned. That didn't make sense. The 12th floor had already been cleared for demolition. Even the emergency lighting had been removed except for battery-powered exit signs. He radioed the control center to report the alarm before taking the elevator upstairs. When the doors opened, complete silence. He slowly walked through the corridor, sweeping his flashlight across empty offices coated in dust. Nothing moved. Every room was vacant. No broken windows. No unlocked doors. No signs anyone had entered. After 15 minutes of searching, he reset the alarm panel and returned to the lobby. He'd barely sat back down when the monitor beeped again. Zone 12C. Exactly the same location. Nathan sighed. Probably a faulty sensor. Old buildings were full of them. He returned upstairs. Again, nothing. This continued 3 more times before sunrise. Each activation came from the exact same hallway. Each search ended the same way. An empty floor. The following evening, Nathan mentioned the faulty sensor to Carl, another guard who'd worked the site before him. Carl's expression changed immediately. 12th floor again. Nathan nodded. Yeah, same corridor every time. Carl stared into his coffee for a moment before quietly saying that every guard assigned to the building had complained about alarms on that floor. Maintenance had inspected the sensors twice. Nothing was wrong with them. Nathan laughed it off. Old wiring. Animals. Maybe even air pressure. Carl didn't argue. He simply wished Nathan a quiet shift before leaving. Around 1:20 that morning, the alarm activated again. Zone 12C. Nathan didn't bother taking the elevator this time. He climbed the stairs instead. As he reached the 12th floor, he immediately noticed something different. One of the office doors that had always been closed now stood slightly open. Only a few inches. He was certain it hadn't been like that earlier. Nathan called out, "Security. If anyone's inside, make yourself known." Only silence answered him. He pushed the door open with his flashlight. The office was empty. Rows of abandoned cubicles stretched into darkness. Dust covered every desk, except one, near the back of the room. A single desk was completely clean. No dust, no debris, as though someone had recently wiped it down. Nathan stepped closer. The surface was spotless. Even stranger, fresh footprints led away from the desk toward another doorway at the rear of the office. They weren't construction boots. They looked like ordinary trainers. He followed them into a narrow corridor that connected to the main hallway. The footprints stopped abruptly on the concrete floor. There was nowhere else they could have gone. No windows, no stairwell, no exit, just a dead-end corridor. Nathan stood there for several seconds, listening. Then, somewhere above him, he heard slow, deliberate footsteps. The footsteps came one at a time, slow, measured, as though someone was deliberately walking across the floor above him. Nathan didn't move. He looked up at the exposed concrete ceiling. That wasn't possible. There was no floor above the 12th. The roof was directly overhead. The sound continued for another 5 or 6 seconds before stopping completely. The silence that followed felt even louder. Nathan quickly searched the surrounding offices again, checking every doorway and every corner with his flashlight. Nothing. The footprints still ended exactly where he'd first seen them. No second set. No indication of where the person had gone. Unable to find anything else, Nathan reported the incident to the control center and finished the remainder of his shift. The following morning, he requested access to the CCTV recordings covering the 12th floor. Only 2 cameras overlooked the north hallway. Both had captured the alarm activation. At 1:20 a.m., the corridor appeared completely empty. Then, without warning, the motion sensor triggered. No person entered the frame. No shadow crossed the hallway. Nothing visible explained why the alarm had activated. Nathan rewound the footage several times. On the 4th viewing, he noticed something almost impossible to see. One office door, the same one he'd later found standing open, slowly began swinging inward by itself. No one appeared behind it. No hand touched the handle. The door simply opened a few inches before stopping. The timestamp showed it happening nearly 40 seconds before Nathan stepped out of the stairwell. Construction supervisors inspected the office later that afternoon. They found no broken locks, hidden entrances, or damaged windows. Everything appeared exactly as Nathan had described. Then one of the supervisors remembered something from the building's original blueprints. Several years earlier, the previous owners had sealed off an old maintenance passage that once connected offices to rooftop ventilation equipment. The entrance had supposedly been removed during renovations. Curious, workers compared the blueprints to the current layout. The measurements didn't match. Behind one of the office walls, there was nearly 4 feet of empty space that shouldn't have existed. The demolition crew carefully removed part of the drywall. Behind it sat the forgotten maintenance passage. It stretched almost the entire length of the building before leading to a narrow ladder hidden inside a service shaft that reached the roof. Inside, investigators found sleeping bags, bottled water, canned food, flashlights, portable phone chargers, and enough supplies for someone to survive there for several weeks. The dust inside the passage was covered with fresh footprints. Whoever had been living there had left only hours before the wall was opened. Police searched the surrounding area, but never located the occupant. Neighbors later told detectives they had occasionally noticed a figure walking across the rooftop late at night, assuming it was security performing routine patrols. It almost certainly wasn't. Investigators believe the unknown person had been secretly living inside the abandoned office building for months, moving through the hidden maintenance passage whenever security guards responded to alarms. Each time Nathan searched the 12th floor, the person had likely been only a few feet away, hidden behind a wall he never knew existed. Looking back, Nathan realized the alarms had never been faulty. They were distractions. Someone was deliberately triggering the motion sensors to draw security toward one end of the building while quietly moving through the concealed passage on the other. Nathan finished the assignment, but he never accepted another contract involving an abandoned building. Not because he was afraid of empty offices, but because he learned that just because a building has been abandoned doesn't mean everyone has moved out. Story 2. The badge didn't exist. 36-year-old Marcus Hill had worked hospital security for almost 9 years. Compared to shopping malls or office buildings, hospitals came with a different kind of responsibility. Visitors wandered into restricted areas, patients occasionally became confused, and medical emergencies happened at every hour of the day. Most overnight shifts were unpredictable, but they were rarely dangerous. At least, that's what Marcus believed. He worked at St. Andrew's Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio, a 7-story hospital that never truly slept. Ambulances arrived throughout the night, doctors moved between departments, and maintenance crews quietly repaired equipment while most patients rested. Security officers were expected to know almost everyone: doctors, nurses, janitors, laboratory staff. After nearly a decade, Marcus could recognize hundreds of faces without looking at their ID badges, which was why one particular man immediately stood out. It was just after 2 a.m. when Marcus first noticed him walking down the surgical corridor on the 4th floor. The man wore blue hospital scrubs beneath a dark jacket. An identification badge hung around his neck. He appeared calm, walking with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Marcus nodded politely as they passed each other. "Evening." The man smiled. "Busy night?" "Not too bad." The conversation lasted only a few seconds before they continued in opposite directions. Nothing about the encounter seemed unusual, until Marcus reached the nurse's station. One of the charge nurses looked up. "Who were you talking to?" Marcus glanced back toward the hallway. "One of the doctors." The nurse frowned. "There aren't any doctors on this floor right now." Marcus looked again. The corridor was empty. He assumed the man had entered one of the operating preparation rooms. Still, something bothered him. He couldn't remember ever seeing him before. Back in the security office, Marcus reviewed the hallway camera. The footage showed him walking down the corridor exactly as he remembered. The unknown man approached from the opposite direction. They stopped, spoke briefly, then separated. Marcus paused the video and zoomed in as much as the system allowed. The ID badge was visible, not clearly enough to read the name, but clearly enough to recognize the hospital logo. He decided to check the access records. Every hospital ID badge automatically recorded entries into secure departments. He searched the timestamp. Nothing. No employee had used their badge on that corridor for nearly 20 minutes before Marcus arrived. That didn't make sense. The doors leading into the surgical wing required electronic access. Whoever the man was, he shouldn't have been able to get inside without scanning a badge. Marcus assumed the access reader had failed to record the entry. It happened occasionally. The following evening, he saw the same man again. This time he was leaving the radiology department on the 2nd floor. Marcus walked directly toward him. "Evening. I don't think we've met." The man smiled warmly. "Probably not. Long shifts. We keep missing each other." Marcus looked at the badge hanging from his neck. "Mind if I see your ID?" The man's smile never disappeared. "Already late for a patient. Next time." Before Marcus could respond, a nurse hurried over asking for help with an aggressive visitor near the emergency department. By the time Marcus dealt with the situation and returned, the man was gone. He checked the nearest exits. Nothing. The CCTV footage showed the man turning a corner toward the diagnostic imaging hallway. Then, he simply never appeared on the next camera. There was no missing footage, no camera failure. He entered one corridor, but never exited it. Marcus searched every room along that hallway with another officer. Storage closets, examination rooms, staff lounges, utility cupboards. Every door was locked or occupied. There was nowhere for anyone to disappear. The next morning, Marcus contacted Human Resources. He described the man as accurately as he could. Blue scrubs, dark jacket, mid-40s, gray hair, about 6 feet tall. HR searched every current employee photograph. Nothing matched. Then one of the administrators quietly asked Marcus a strange question. "Did the badge have a blue stripe across the top?" Marcus thought for a moment. "Yeah, I'm pretty sure it did." The administrator slowly leaned back in her chair. "We stopped using blue-striped ID badges almost 3 years ago." The administrator excused herself and disappeared into a records room. A few minutes later, She returned carrying a thick binder filled with old employee identification files. Marcus watched as she flipped through page after page of outdated staff photographs. Then she stopped. Without saying a word, she turned the binder around. The photograph showed the same man Marcus had spoken to twice. Blue scrubs, gray hair, calm expression. Even the dark jacket was identical. Marcus looked from the photograph back to the administrator. That's him. Who is he? She hesitated before answering. His name was Daniel Brooks. He worked here as a surgical technician. He left the hospital just over 2 years ago. Marcus frowned. Where did he transfer to? The administrator shook her head. He didn't. He resigned after a serious complaint involving missing prescription medication. Internal investigators couldn't prove he was responsible, but his access privileges were revoked immediately. His ID badge was deactivated the same day he left. Marcus sat in silence. If that was true, the man he'd spoken to had been wearing a badge that shouldn't have worked for over 2 years. The administrator printed Daniel's personnel photo and handed it to Marcus. Take this to your supervisor. If someone is impersonating a former employee, we need to know immediately. That evening, hospital security treated the situation as a potential intruder investigation. Every entrance and exit was monitored. Additional officers were assigned to patrol restricted departments. Marcus carried the photograph in his pocket throughout the night. Just after 3 a.m., he saw Daniel again. This time, the man stepped through a pair of secure doors leading into the pharmacy corridor. Marcus immediately followed. Daniel turned the corner ahead of him, walking at an unhurried pace as though he expected to be there. Marcus called out, "Security, stop where you are." The man didn't run. He simply kept walking. Marcus rounded the corner only seconds later and found the corridor empty. There were no side hallways, no patient rooms, only one locked medication storage room and a fire exit protected by an alarm that had never been opened. Another officer arrived within moments. Together, they searched every accessible room. Nothing. Marcus reviewed the nearby CCTV footage immediately. The recording clearly showed Daniel entering the pharmacy corridor. Marcus followed 4 seconds later. But there was one crucial difference. Daniel never reached the corner. Halfway down the hallway, he stopped beside a plain white service door. He glanced once over his shoulder, then slipped inside. Marcus stared at the screen. That door shouldn't have existed. He knew the corridor well. There had never been a service entrance there. The officers returned to the hallway. The white door from the recording wasn't there, only a solid concrete wall. Confused, Marcus requested building maintenance. Within an hour, the chief engineer arrived carrying decades-old renovation plans. After comparing the blueprints with the current layout, he pointed to the exact spot where Daniel had disappeared. Years earlier, before the hospital expanded, that section had contained a narrow service passage connecting the pharmacy to an old records archive. The corridor had been permanently sealed during renovations. The doorway had been removed and covered with drywall. There was no longer any physical way to enter it. The following day, contractors opened part of the wall during a scheduled maintenance inspection. Behind the drywall, investigators discovered something unexpected. The old service passage still existed. It hadn't been completely filled in. Someone had been accessing it through a concealed panel hidden inside a nearby maintenance cupboard. Fresh footprints covered the dusty floor. Scattered throughout the passage were empty food containers, bottled water, blankets, and several stolen hospital uniforms. At the far end, officers found dozens of counterfeit employee ID badges, each carefully made to resemble official hospital identification. Some carried names of current employees. Others belonged to former staff who had left years earlier. Detectives concluded that someone had secretly been living inside the abandoned maintenance passage, occasionally disguising themselves as hospital staff to move unnoticed through the building. Using the counterfeit badges and blending in with the constant flow of doctors and nurses, the intruder had remained invisible for months. The personnel photograph of Daniel Brooks had likely been chosen because most long-serving employees remembered his face but hadn't seen him in years. Seeing someone they vaguely recognized made them less likely to ask questions. The real Daniel, now living in another state, was questioned by police and completely cleared. He had no idea his identity had been used. Marcus finished another 5 years working hospital security, but from that night forward, he stopped assuming that anyone wearing scrubs and an ID badge automatically belonged there. Because sometimes, the most dangerous person in a hospital isn't the one trying to sneak in. It's the one who looks like they never left. Story 3. Someone was watching the cameras. 29-year-old Ethan Carter had always preferred working behind the monitors instead of walking patrols. For 6 years, he'd worked overnight security at Westbrook Galleria, a large shopping mall outside Indianapolis, Indiana. Once the stores closed at 9 p.m., the building transformed into an entirely different place. The bright music stopped. Thousands of shoppers disappeared. Metal shutters rolled down over storefronts, leaving only long, silent corridors lit by emergency lighting. Most of Ethan's shift was spent inside the security control room. More than 100 CCTV cameras covered every entrance, hallway, loading dock, rooftop access point, and service corridor. Every camera could be rotated remotely using a joystick mounted beside his keyboard. If something happened anywhere inside the mall, Ethan usually saw it first. Around midnight, he began his routine camera sweep. Everything looked normal. The food court was empty. Department stores were locked. Cleaning crews were finishing on the lower level. Nothing unusual. Then camera 42 caught his attention. It overlooked one of the longest corridors in the West Wing. For less than a second, someone walked across the far end of the hallway. Ethan immediately stopped the recording and played it back. There it was again. A figure wearing a dark hoodie crossed from one storefront to another before disappearing behind a support column. He zoomed in. The image wasn't clear enough to identify a face. Just a person who absolutely shouldn't have been there. Ethan radioed another guard named Luis. "I've got possible movement in the West Wing. I'll check it out. Keep the cameras on me." Luis arrived in the corridor less than 3 minutes later. Ethan guided him through the earpiece. "Keep walking. Another 20 feet. Check behind the old electronics store." Luis searched every corner. Nothing. Ethan switched between nearby cameras. The corridor remained completely empty. He replayed the original recording. The figure was gone. Not because it had left. Because the recording itself no longer showed anyone crossing the hallway. He frowned. He knew what he'd seen. Thinking the system had glitched, Ethan continued working. About 40 minutes later, a motion alert appeared near one of the service corridors behind the clothing stores. Camera 58 automatically opened on his monitor. Again, a hooded figure stood at the very edge of the frame before disappearing. Ethan immediately rotated the camera. The corridor was empty. Luis searched the area. Nothing. When Ethan returned camera 58 to its original position, its angle looked different. Only slightly. Just enough that part of the hallway was no longer visible. He was certain he hadn't left it there. He adjusted it back. 5 minutes later, it had moved again, slowly, almost as though someone else had taken control after him. Ethan checked the system logs. Every camera movement was automatically recorded. His employee ID appeared dozens of times throughout the night. Then he noticed another active user. Operator 02. That couldn't be right. There wasn't an Operator 02 on duty. Only Ethan. His supervisor was at home. No maintenance staff had remote access overnight. He opened the live activity window. Operator 02 had just moved camera 31. A second later, camera 19 rotated. Then camera 64. Whoever was logged in wasn't moving randomly. They were following Luis through the building. Ethan watched in disbelief as each camera shifted moments before Luis entered its field of view. Someone was tracking the guard's exact location. Ethan grabbed the radio. "Luis, stop where you are. Don't move." Luis sounded confused. "Why?" Because someone else is controlling the cameras. Silence filled the radio for several seconds. Then Luis quietly answered, "That's not funny." Ethan wasn't joking. He disconnected every remote camera from the control console and switched them into manual lockdown mode. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, one by one, the cameras began moving anyway. Not quickly, not erratically. Each one slowly turned away from the corridors, as if someone wanted to make absolutely certain the security team couldn't see what was about to happen. The control room fell completely silent. Ethan stared at the monitors as camera after camera continued rotating on its own. He wasn't touching the joystick. The remote controls had already been disabled, yet the cameras kept moving. Every one of them stopped facing blank walls, closed storefront shutters, or empty sections of ceiling. The hallways themselves had disappeared from view. Ethan immediately called his supervisor, who instructed him to contact local police while the remaining guards secured the main entrances. Luis and another officer were told not to search the building alone. Instead, they stayed together, moving cautiously through the mall while remaining on the radio. Without the cameras, Ethan had no idea what was happening beyond the control room. Then another alert appeared. "Emergency Exit 7. Opened." Ethan looked at the floor plan. Exit 7 was located beside the loading docks behind the department stores. Luis responded first. "We're heading there now." As the two guards approached the area, Ethan noticed something strange. One camera still overlooked part of the loading dock. It hadn't rotated. Instead, it was shaking slightly. Someone was physically adjusting it from below. The image steadied. For just a moment, a man wearing a dark hoodie looked directly into the lens. Then he reached up. The screen went black. Connection lost. Luis and the other guard reached the loading dock less than a minute later. The emergency exit was standing open. Fresh tire marks led away from the building. Inside the loading area, several pallets had been moved, and one storage cage had been forced open. At first, it appeared the burglars had escaped with nothing. But during the morning inventory, several jewelry stores reported that high-value display cases had been emptied overnight. The total loss exceeded $400,000. Detectives from the Property Crimes Unit took over the investigation. When they examined the security network, they discovered malware had been installed on the CCTV system several days earlier. It hadn't disabled the cameras. Instead, it quietly gave an outside user full control over every motorized camera in the building. The intruders had spent days studying the mall's overnight routine. They learned exactly when Ethan performed camera sweeps, exactly where each patrol guard walked, exactly how long it took security to respond to alarms. On the night of the burglary, they intentionally triggered motion alerts in different parts of the mall. Every false alarm pulled the guards farther away from the loading docks, while the person controlling the CCTV ensured Ethan could never see where the real break-in was happening. The hooded figure Ethan had spotted wasn't wandering the mall by accident. He wanted to be seen. He was bait. Everything had been planned to keep security focused on the wrong place. Weeks later, investigators arrested 3 members of an organized burglary crew after recovering some of the stolen jewelry. One suspect admitted they had paid a freelance hacker to compromise the mall's camera system. Their biggest advantage wasn't breaking into the building. It was making sure the people responsible for protecting it were effectively blind. The hacker himself was never identified. His connection disappeared minutes after the burglary, leaving almost no digital trace behind. The shopping mall replaced its entire surveillance network and introduced new security procedures requiring random patrol routes and independent camera verification. Ethan stayed in the job for another year before moving into cybersecurity. He later admitted that the burglary itself never bothered him as much as one particular moment from that night. The instant the cameras began turning by themselves. Because until then, he'd always believed that if something dangerous happened inside the mall, he would be the first person to see it. He never imagined that somewhere in the darkness, someone else was already watching him first. Story 4. Every door was locked. 32-year-old Ryan Foster had spent nearly 4 years working overnight security at a distribution warehouse on the outskirts of Kansas City, Missouri. The facility was enormous. More than 500,000 square feet of storage space stretched across the property, packed with towering metal shelves stacked almost to the ceiling. During the day, hundreds of employees moved products in every direction using forklifts and conveyor systems. By midnight, however, the building became almost completely silent. Only Ryan remained inside. His job was straightforward. Every hour, he completed a patrol of the warehouse floor, checked the emergency exits, verified the loading bays were secure, and monitored the alarm system from a small security office near the front entrance. The company stored millions of dollars worth of electronics inside the building, so security was taken seriously. Every exterior door required a key card from the inside. Every emergency exit triggered an alarm if opened. The loading docks were protected by reinforced shutters that couldn't be raised without activating the control system. Management often reminded Ryan of one reassuring fact. If anyone entered the warehouse after closing, there was only one way back out. Through him. For almost a year, nothing unusual happened. Then, late one Thursday night, an emergency exit alarm sounded. Exit door 14. Ryan immediately checked the security monitor. The door appeared closed. The alarm continued to flash. He grabbed his flashlight and radio before making the long walk across the warehouse floor. The shelves towered above him, casting deep shadows between the narrow aisles. Even after years in the job, the place felt unsettling once the machinery shut down. When he reached exit door 14, everything looked normal. The alarm light above the door had stopped flashing. The push bar was still locked. The security seal placed across the frame earlier that evening remained completely intact. Ryan tested the handle. Locked. He reset the alarm panel and began walking back toward the office. Halfway there, another alarm activated. Exit door 22. That door sat almost 300 yards away on the opposite side of the warehouse. Ryan sighed. Faulty wiring, he muttered to himself. By the time he reached door 22, exactly the same thing. Door closed. Seal untouched. No sign anyone had entered or left. The following night, the alarms returned. Not one, not two. 6 different emergency exits activated over the course of 4 hours. Each inspection ended the same way. Locked doors. No damage. No explanation. Maintenance tested every alarm circuit the next morning. Nothing was wrong. Every sensor passed inspection. On Saturday night, Ryan decided to do something different. Instead of immediately responding to the next alarm, he opened the live camera feed covering each emergency exit. At 1:43 a.m., exit door 18 activated. Ryan pulled up the camera. The door remained closed. No movement. No people. Then something caught his eye. A set of muddy footprints appeared on the concrete floor just inside the emergency exit. Not gradually. Not as though someone had walked into view. They were simply there. Ryan leaned closer to the monitor. The footprints continued away from the door and disappeared between 2 storage aisles. He immediately radioed his supervisor before heading toward the location. When he arrived less than 3 minutes later, the footprints were exactly where the camera had shown them. Fresh mud, clear tread marks. They couldn't have been more than a few minutes old. Ryan followed them into the warehouse. The prints continued for nearly 50 yards before turning into a narrow aisle stacked with expensive computer servers. He rounded the corner carefully. Nothing. The aisle was empty. The muddy trail continued another few feet, then stopped completely. There were no return footprints. No ladder. No hidden doorway. No place for anyone to disappear. Ryan searched every surrounding aisle for almost 30 minutes without finding another sign of whoever had left them. When the morning shift arrived, police reviewed the footage. The cameras clearly showed the footprints appearing on the warehouse floor, but they never captured anyone creating them. Even stranger, every exterior door was still locked from the inside. No alarms had actually been triggered. According to the system logs, Someone had manually activated them using the warehouse's internal security control panel. The warehouse only had one internal security control panel. It sat inside Ryan's office near the main entrance. Access required both a physical key and an employee security code. Only 4 people possessed them: Ryan, his supervisor, the site manager, and the regional security director. All 4 denied activating the alarms. The company initially suspected a fault in the software. Technicians examined the system over the weekend but found no evidence of malfunction. Every alarm activation had been entered manually. Every command originated from the control panel inside Ryan's office. Ryan knew that was impossible. He'd been walking patrols each time the alarm sounded. The office had been empty. To remove any doubt, management installed an additional CCTV camera overlooking the security office itself. The following Tuesday, Ryan began another overnight shift. Everything remained quiet until just after 2 a.m. The alarm sounded again. Exit door 9. Instead of leaving immediately, Ryan opened the new camera feed showing the security office. The room was empty. His chair sat pushed beneath the desk. The control panel glowed quietly on the wall. Then, the keypad lit up. One button after another began illuminating, as though invisible fingers were pressing them. Ryan watched in disbelief as the system accepted a complete access code. A second later, exit door 9 activated. The office camera showed no one. Ryan sprinted back toward the front of the building. When he reached the office, the keypad was still displaying the alarm confirmation screen. No one was inside. The entrance door remained locked. Police were called again. This time, investigators expanded their search beyond the warehouse floor. They inspected maintenance rooms, electrical ducts, and the narrow service spaces running between the interior walls. Several hours later, one detective noticed something unusual inside the ceiling above the security office. A section of insulation had recently been disturbed. Contractors removed part of the suspended ceiling. Above it, they discovered a cramped maintenance passage running across the front of the building. Fresh footprints covered the dust. The passage led to an old electrical room that had been abandoned years earlier during renovations. Inside, officers found blankets, bottled water, canned food, portable batteries, and several weeks' worth of supplies. Someone had been living there. More importantly, they found a thin fiber optic inspection camera hanging through a small hole drilled directly above Ryan's security desk. The tiny camera pointed straight at the alarm keypad. Investigators quickly understood what had been happening. The intruder had secretly watched Ryan entering his security code night after night until they memorized it. Using a homemade mechanical device lowered through another opening in the ceiling, they were able to physically press the keypad buttons from above whenever Ryan left the office. Each false alarm forced him to patrol the opposite end of the warehouse, while security searched empty emergency exits. The intruder quietly climbed down into the building through the maintenance passage, scouting valuable inventory and studying patrol routes without ever intending to steal anything immediately. Detectives believed they were preparing for a much larger burglary that never happened because the investigation exposed their hiding place first. Despite an extensive search of the surrounding industrial estate, the suspect was never identified. They had abandoned the maintenance passage only hours before police discovered it. The last piece of evidence was recovered several days later. Forensic officers dusting the alarm keypad found fingerprints that didn't belong to any employee. Those prints matched a man wanted in 3 other states for breaking into warehouses using almost identical methods. He had never been caught. Ryan finished out the remainder of his contract, but one habit never left him. Every single time he walked out of the security office, even if it was only for a few minutes, he looked up at the ceiling first, because he realized that the person setting off the alarms had never been outside trying to get in. They'd been inside the building the entire time, watching him from directly overhead. Story 5: The Last Patrol. 58-year-old David Collins had spent almost 30 years working private security. He'd protected office towers, construction sites, factories, and business parks across Northern Virginia. Over the decades, he'd responded to countless false alarms, chased off vandals, and called police for everything from broken windows to attempted thefts. Experience had taught him one simple lesson. Most suspicious calls turned out to be nothing, which was exactly why he never ignored them. The final shift of David's career fell on a cold Friday night in late November. After 30 years, he was retiring. His assignment couldn't have been simpler. Patrol a quiet business park containing 6 office buildings, check each entrance once every hour, and remain on site until the morning guard arrived. The companies inside had already closed for the weekend. By 10 p.m., the entire business park was deserted. David drove the familiar route in a marked security SUV, stopping briefly outside each building to inspect the entrances before moving to the next. Just after midnight, everything still looked exactly as it always had. No damaged doors, no broken windows, no vehicles that didn't belong. Around 1:15 a.m., he pulled into the parking lot of Building 4, a financial services office he had checked hundreds of times over the years. As he completed his usual walk around the property, something caught his attention. One light was on inside a second-floor conference room. He stopped. That room should have been dark. The cleaning staff had left hours earlier. David shone his flashlight through the glass entrance doors. Nothing moved. He unlocked the lobby, entered the building, and checked every accessible floor. The conference room was empty. The light switch had been left on. Satisfied that someone had simply forgotten it before leaving for the weekend, he switched it off, locked the building, and returned to his vehicle. 10 minutes later, while driving toward Building 5, he glanced into his rear-view mirror. The same conference room light was on again. David frowned. He knew he'd switched it off. He turned the vehicle around and drove back. This time, before entering the building, he remained outside for several minutes, watching the second-floor windows. Nothing. The light stayed on. He unlocked the entrance once more and climbed the stairs. The conference room was still empty. The switch remained in the off position, yet the lights above the table were glowing. David looked closer. They weren't connected to the main switch at all. A portable battery-powered work light had been placed beneath the conference table, pointing upward toward the ceiling. Someone had deliberately positioned it to make the room appear occupied from outside. He immediately radioed the monitoring center. Possible trespasser. Request police assistance. While waiting, David continued checking the remainder of the building. Nothing appeared disturbed. No forced entry. No missing equipment. No broken windows. When officers arrived 20 minutes later, they searched alongside him. Again, nothing. One officer suggested that perhaps a contractor had forgotten the portable light during recent renovations. It sounded reasonable, until David checked the equipment label. The battery pack had been manufactured only 3 months earlier. The office renovations had finished nearly 2 years before. Police photographed the light before leaving it with building management. By 3 a.m., everything was quiet again. David resumed his patrol. As he approached the far end of the business park, he noticed something else that didn't belong. A white delivery van sat parked between 2 office buildings with its lights off. He didn't recognize the vehicle. There were no company logos. No registration permits displayed on the dashboard. Most concerning of all, it hadn't been there an hour earlier. David slowed the SUV to a stop roughly 50 yards away. Instead of immediately approaching the van, he switched off his headlights and simply watched. For almost 2 full minutes, nothing happened. Then the rear doors of the van opened slightly. Someone inside carefully looked toward the security vehicle before quietly closing them again. David reached for his radio. He had a feeling his final overnight patrol was about to become the most important one of his entire career. David kept his eyes on the van while quietly speaking into his radio. He requested police assistance immediately, but deliberately kept his voice calm. There was no point alarming whoever was inside. The dispatcher advised him to observe from a safe distance and avoid making contact unless absolutely necessary. David acknowledged the instruction. Then he did something that 30 years of experience had taught him. He looked around, not at the van, at everything else. The business park suddenly felt wrong. The parking lots were empty. The office lights were dark. But several landscaping gates that normally remained secured had been left standing open. Fresh tire tracks crossed patches of wet grass between two buildings. Someone had been driving where vehicles weren't supposed to go. David slowly repositioned his SUV to block the only road leading out of the business park. If the van tried to leave before police arrived, it would have to pass him. Almost immediately, the rear doors opened again. This time, 3 men climbed out. None of them approached David. Instead, they casually walked towards separate office buildings as if they belonged there. David recognized the tactic instantly. They were trying to split his attention. If he followed one, the other 2 would be free to move. He stayed exactly where he was. A few seconds later, movement caught his eye on the opposite side of the parking lot. A 4th man stepped out from behind a row of bushes carrying a large duffel bag. David hadn't even realized there was another person outside. He radioed the update to responding officers. 4 suspects confirmed, possibly more. Then something else became obvious. The men weren't carrying stolen property. Not yet. They were carrying bolt cutters, battery-powered grinders, pry bars, heavy gloves, and handheld radios. This wasn't a burglary in progress. It was the final preparation before one. Police units arrived within minutes, entering the business park from opposite directions. The suspects immediately scattered. 2 attempted to flee on foot between the office buildings. 1 jumped back into the van. Another tried climbing a perimeter fence before officers intercepted him. Within 10 minutes, all 4 men had been arrested. The investigation that followed revealed just how close the business park had come to suffering one of the largest commercial burglaries in the county's history. Detectives searched the white van. Inside, they found detailed floor plans for every building on the site, copies of alarm schedules, photographs of security cameras, employee shift changes, maps marking blind spots between patrol routes. Most unsettling of all, they discovered a notebook containing handwritten observations dating back almost 6 weeks. Each page documented David's nightly routine, the exact minute he arrived at every building, how long he spent checking entrances, where he parked during breaks, even which route he normally drove between patrols. The crew had been watching him for over a month. They planned to wait until he reached the opposite side of the business park before forcing entry into 3 office buildings at the same time. The portable work light inside the conference room hadn't been random. It was a test. They wanted to know whether David would investigate unusual activity or ignore it. When he responded exactly as they expected, they adjusted their plan accordingly. The unidentified van was never supposed to be seen. It arrived earlier than intended because one member of the crew mistakenly believed David had already completed his final patrol. That single error gave David enough time to notice everything else. Weeks later, the lead detective personally visited David at home. He explained that the arrested men were linked to a criminal group responsible for multiple high-value commercial burglaries across 3 states. Until now, investigators had never understood how the group consistently avoided security patrols. The notebook answered that question. They didn't rely on luck. They studied people. They learned routines. They watched guards until every movement became predictable. The detective smiled before shaking David's hand. He admitted that if a newer officer had been working that final night, the crew might have succeeded. Most people would have driven straight toward the suspicious van. David had spent 30 years learning that experience wasn't about reacting faster. It was about recognizing when something didn't fit. Retirement suited him well. Friends occasionally asked whether he missed working overnight security. David always gave the same answer. He missed the quiet nights. He didn't miss wondering whether someone was watching him from the darkness, waiting for him to make the same mistake twice. If you enjoyed tonight's stories, don't forget to like the video. Leave a comment telling me which story unsettled you the most, and subscribe to Dreadful Visions for more realistic horror stories inspired by the ordinary places we trust every day. New nightmares arrive every other day, and you never know which everyday situation might become the next one to haunt you. Until next time, stay aware, trust your instincts, and remember that the scariest places are often the ones that seem the safest. Sleep well tonight, if you can.